Yo, what's up? Dr. Swole here, MD bodybuilder, back with another video. Today we're going to be talking about push-pull legs versus the upper-lower split. These are two of the most popular splits in bodybuilding, and today we're going to answer the question of which one should you choose. This is probably one of the most common questions I get asked, and each of these splits has some unique benefits and drawbacks. Quick outline for today. First, we're going to talk about frequency, which is actually really important to think about whenever you're talking about splits. Then we'll dive into the specifics of push-pull legs and the upper-lower split. And for each of these, I'll go into how I like to set them up, as well as pros and cons. Lastly, I'll give you some recommendations on which one you should choose. If you've been enjoying my content so far, make sure you smash that like button, hit subscribe, and let's get into it. Starting off, frequency is a very important variable to think about whenever we're planning our training split. If you look at the research we have so far, a lot of studies will actually say that if you equate volume, frequency itself doesn't really matter. However, if you look at things from a practical standpoint, even if you were doing the same number of sets per week, if you split that up across multiple sessions, you're going to be able to do more productive volume and practice your technique. Let's say you were planning to do 20 sets of quads throughout the week, and you were going to do 10 sets with heavy squat type movements and 10 sets with machine movements. Now let's say I asked you to put all of those 20 sets into one workout. By the end of the workout, you'd be so exhausted that you just wouldn't be pushing as much weight for as many reps, and your training quality overall would just go down. So what comes out of this is that my current recommendation for frequency is to train each muscle group at least 2 times per week, and you should try to cap out your sessions at 8 to 10 sets per muscle group per workout. Alright, let's get into push-pull legs. Push-pull legs is a very popular bodybuilding split where you divide up your training into 3 main days: push day, pull day, and leg day. So on push day, you're training your pushing muscles, which would include chest, triceps, and shoulders. On pull days, you'll be training your pulling muscles, which are your biceps and back. And on leg days, you'll be training your lower body, which will be quads, hamstrings, glutes, and calves. Now let me start off by clarifying that when I talk about push-pull legs, I really mean legs push-pull. That's the way I like to set it up. So if you looked at this split across a week, I would set it up as legs push-pull, legs push-pull, and then rest day. Here's why I set it up this way. Let's say you put this rest day on Sunday. That means on Monday, when you start off your training week, that's when you're going to be most fresh. And you want to start off with the toughest day, which is going to be legs. The other thing you need to consider after that is leg training can interfere with your back training. So you don't want to put a pull day immediately after leg day. However, training your back doesn't affect your leg training as much because upper body movements just don't tax the system as much. So it's okay to put a pull day before a leg day. This comes into play over here in the middle of the week when you've got legs push pull and then you've got legs coming after that. Now, if we follow my recommendation of training every muscle group at least 2 times per week, if you're going to do push-pull legs, you're going to be training 6 days per week in order to get a twice per week frequency for every muscle group. This will have some implications in terms of our choice between push-pull legs versus upper-lower split. Let's talk about the pros of the push-pull leg split. First of all, it balances your upper and lower body very well. Now, if you look at the total number of muscle groups in your upper and lower body, you've got more muscle groups in your upper body. You've got chest, back, shoulders, biceps, and triceps. Whereas if you look at your legs, you've got quads, hamstrings, and glutes, which I count together, and calves. Where you place abs, and even if you do train them, is another topic. But if you look at the push-pull leg split, you'll see that it works well to balance this out because you've got 2 upper body days and 1 lower body day. What comes out of this is that push-pull legs is good for an upper body focused training plan. So if your goal is to improve your upper body, then it's very convenient for this. Push-pull legs also works very well with strength training programming. By strength training, I basically mean if you have powerlifting goals in the squat, bench, and deadlift. So it's very easy to slot in basic, beginner, and intermediate type strength plans into a push-pull leg split. Let's talk about the cons of push-pull legs. As we said, we really want to be shooting for at least twice per week frequency for every muscle group. Since push-pull legs, or legs push-pull as I do it, is a 3-day cycle, that means to get twice per week frequency for each muscle group, you need to be training 6 days per week. And that's a lot, especially for a beginner or intermediate athlete. For people in their first few years of training, I really don't think it's necessary to have to commit to 6 days a week. It isn't as easy to shuffle workouts around, and as soon as you drop off of 6 days per week, it's not going to be optimal. Now, I often get asked whether it's okay to do push-pull legs if you're only in the gym 4 to 5 days a week or even less. On a related note, I also often get asked whether it's okay to do legs push-pull rest, legs push-pull rest. So having a rest day after each cycle of legs push-pull. Now in terms of training 5 days per week or doing this legs push-pull rest, legs push-pull rest routine, I think it's okay, but it's just not going to be quite as ideal as training 6 days per week if you want to do push-pull legs. And if you're going below 5 days a week, I'd say push-pull legs would be straight up suboptimal. Also, when you break out of that weekly structure, you lose your routine and it also becomes more difficult to track weekly volume in terms of sets. All right, now let's move on to the upper-lower split. In terms of pros, first of all, upper-lower is very flexible. It's going to work great for 4 to 6 days per week. First, touching on how I like to set this up, I usually like to put my upper days before my lower days if they're back to back. The reason for this, which we touched on earlier, is that heavy leg training is going to affect your upper body training if it comes immediately after, but not so much vice versa. So looking at this structure, if you were training 4 days per week, you would do upper, lower, upper, lower. If you're training 5 days a week, you could either do upper, lower, upper, lower, upper, or lower, upper, lower, upper, lower. And if you're training 6 days a week, I would recommend going upper, lower, upper, lower, upper, lower, rest. Now the upper, lower split also works very well with strength programming. In fact, it might even be better than the push-pull legs in certain circumstances where you really want that 3 times per week frequency for a certain lift. If you really want to get into the higher frequency bench or squat training, the 5 and 6 day per week upper-lower splits will allow you to program that in. Moving on to the cons of the upper-lower split. One problem is that, as we talked about, there are more muscle groups in the upper body than the lower body. So upper body days tend to be long. Now there is an easy solution to this, which I've come up with, which is to do a modified upper-lower split. What I like to do is I'll take some sets from my smaller muscle groups. I like biceps and side delts for this, and I'll move them over onto leg day. When you move some of those sets over like this, it does 2 things. First of all, it evens out your upper lower body day lengths. And second of all, it also gives you a higher frequency. Note that's a 4 times frequency if you split up half of your side delt training onto lower and upper body days, and actually steps you up to 4 times a week training for those small muscle groups. And for a lot of people, smaller muscle groups actually tend to respond better to higher frequency training since they can recover faster. The other con of the upper lower split is that if you're doing a 3 times per week frequency, you need to be really careful with intensity, failure training, and rep ranges. Our connective tissues like tendons tend to recover more slowly than muscles themselves. If you're training with a higher frequency, you need to be careful about training with high intensities all the time, which means heavy weights, training to failure all the time, or training with the same rep ranges, especially if they're low rep ranges. The reason is training with heavy weights, low rep ranges, and training to failure tend to stress the connective tissues more. And if you're training the same muscle group with a high frequency using those techniques, your connective tissues might not recover from session to session, which might eventually lead to aches and pains and even injuries. All right, let's put everything together and talk about which split you should choose in terms of push-pull legs versus upper-lower. If you're training 4 to 5 days per week, I would actually generally recommend choosing upper-lower, just because it's going to be more flexible and it'll make sure you get into that 2 times per week frequency. Now, some people will argue that beginners don't actually need the minimum of 2 times per week frequency, mainly since they aren't doing so much volume and don't need to split it up. In that case, I would still recommend twice per week frequency, just because it's going to split up your volume and you'll be more productive for each of those sets, and that higher frequency will help beginners practice their technique early on. If you're training 6 days per week, it's really up to you as to which one of these splits you would choose. In general, you should go for legs push-pull if you want an upper body focus, just because you've got those 2 upper body days for the 1 lower body day. And you should go for upper lower if you're lower body focused, just because you've got those 2 upper body days and 1 lower body day. And you should go for upper lower if you want a lower body focus. Last recommendation, you should really think about making modifications to these splits. Nothing's really set in stone in terms of programming. You should really think about treating each muscle group as having its own individual program. And each muscle group is going to have its optimal volume, frequency, intensity, and rep ranges for it to be trained the best. So really think about modifying these splits to suit your own needs. If you want to learn more about programming and specifically the upper lower split, check out my book where I give you some sample programs on different modified versions of the upper lower split. And even if you're not doing upper lower, a lot of the concepts I talk about will apply to other splits as well. That's all for now, guys. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you like the video and leave me a comment. In particular, which split do you like better, push-pull legs or upper lower? Let me know below. If you're curious about body recomposition, which is building muscle and losing fat at the same time, check out my playlist on body recomposition, where I talk about who's able to recomp and how to do it. If you've been getting value from my content, make sure you subscribe and share the channel with your fitness friends so they can benefit from it too. See you next time.